Now, the Great Depression was the worst economic crisis in American history, and that stock market crash kicks it off, especially when those people speculated on those stocks, like we saw in that last little section. But when the market crashes, what we have to understand is that it's going to set off a chain reaction of events. For example, if you took out these loans and you bought stocks and the market crashes, you can't pay them back. You have defaulted on your loans. Now, as we can see, that when you default on something, it just means that you failed to pay a debt. But the problem is that failure to pay a debt, defaulting on the loans that you bought stocks with, that's going to set off a whole series of things. So while the stock market crash and those defaults, they're not the only causes of the Great Depression, they're going to help spark a series of other problems that are going to be part of and cause of the Great Depression. Here's an example of one of those things that actually leads to the Great Depression, sparked on by these different loans. And it's this thing here in the box. Lots of people took out loans, and so the companies, and they were buying things with them. So companies thought that people had more money than they really did. That means that farms and factories would overproduce. Like if I love Legos, right, and I see that everybody has a ton of money, I'm going to make a ton of Legos for them to buy. But the problem is they didn't really actually have all that money. It was loans. So I'm overproducing Legos. Like eventually people are going to run out of money and they're not going to be able to buy anything anymore. That is called overproduction. And that cycle is really going to be hard to break and bad for Americans. Here's what I mean by that particular cycle that's going to be hard to break and bad for Americans when we have overproduction. It starts off right here with number one. There's too much of something, too many Legos. That means I have to sell them. So the price is going to drop because I got to get rid of these Legos. Well, number two says, falling prices means lower profit. The company that I run, Lego Incorporated, isn't going to make as much money because I have to sell all these extra Legos cheap. Oh boy, that's going to be an even bigger problem when I'm looking at the reality of what's in front of me. That reality being that, well, lower profit means I have to lay off more workers. Well, if we look at what happens next, if I lay off more workers, that causes high employment, which means fewer people out there can afford to buy any Legos. So what's going to happen? Number one becomes number five. I have a surplus of goods and prices will continue to fall, which means number two becomes number six. Falling prices means less profit, and around we go until finally there's so many problems that my company, Lego Incorporated, simply can't stay open. This is going to be really bad for American businesses when we combine that overproduction cycle with a different cycle, a cycle called bank runs. This concept is going to be the idea that when people put money in a bank, if that bank goes out of business, you lose that cash. Right? Like I give them money to, your credit union. Your credit union goes out of business. I can't get my money back. During the Depression, Americans panicked because of these bank runs. And these bank runs are going to snowball and get out of control, and they're going to be bad for business too. On the screen here is the cycle of bank runs spiraling out of control. When people saw loans being defaulted on, they panic, right? Like think about it. You go home today and you learn that 5 of your 7 neighbors have defaulted on loans they own to the bank because of the stock market crash. Holy crap. If those loans are being defaulted, the bank is losing money. I'm going to panic. I'm going to run to the bank. I'm going to create what was called a bank run. I'm going to run to the bank. I'm going to withdraw as much money as the bank lets me withdraw. But I'm not alone. Hundreds of other people in the town are doing the same thing because all of their friends lost money too. What we're going to do is by taking as much money as we can out of that bank, what we're doing is putting it out of business. And I know that doesn't sound like that big of a deal, but consider it. When banks go out of business, it makes it hard for companies to get loans. That means they have to lay off even more workers. And the workers default on their loans because they don't have a job, which means even more people will panic, which means there'll be even more bank runs. You get this a concept, right, of how this works. These are all things that contribute to the Great Depression. Now, you add all this up, you've got countries reacting in fear, like America around the world. They got other countries around the world seeing their economies collapse for different reasons too. This means that what we're going to see is not just one of the worst economic disasters for our country, but the other countries of the world are going to see an economic disaster too. So all these companies that are looking for some place to sell their goods, who are stuck in this snowballed overproduction and these snowballing bank runs, they're not going to have a market for exports. They're not going to have any place to sell all the things they make. So, what we're going to see is that the Great Depression really is caused by a variety of things, right? It's the stock market crash in part, it's people defaulting on their loans, it's overproduction, it's bank runs, it's having no place else to sell your goods that you make. It's going to be a really difficult reality for a lot of people in America.